At exactly 2:14 a.m. this morning, the heartbeat of American industry experienced a cardiac arrest. The assembly lines at the Ford Rouge complex in Michigan, a sprawling symbol of American manufacturing might, did not slow down gradually. They went dead silent. Moments later, across the border in Ohio, the lights flickered and died across 3 million homes. For weeks, the White House has been obsessed with the ocean, deploying the United States Navy to blockade Canadian oil tankers in a show of geopolitical force. But while the president was watching the waves, the real attack came from beneath the earth. It wasn't a hypersonic missile strike. It wasn't a state-sponsored cyber attack on the grid. It was a simple mechanical act. A valve turned clockwise, just 300 meters north of the 49th parallel. Why did the lights go out in the arsenal of democracy? Why is the most powerful military on Earth helpless to restart the factories that build its transport trucks? And why did the governor of Michigan wake up this morning to the horrific realization that the pipeline she spent her career trying to destroy was actually the only thing keeping her state alive? This is not a traditional trade war. This is a siege. Canada has activated the Winter Protection Protocol, effectively cutting the power cord to the American Midwest. You are watching the Detroit Blackout. To understand why a factory in Detroit cannot function without a permission slip from Ottawa, we must look at the map. Not the political map, but the energy map. Most Americans believe the United States is energy independent. For the nation as a whole, this is true. But for the Midwest, it is a dangerous lie. The industrial heartland of America, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Indiana, operates on a shared circulatory system with Canada. At the center of this system lies Line 5. For decades, this massive pipeline has run silently along the bottom of the Straits of Mackinac, connecting Michigan's two peninsulas. To the average voter, it is just an old oil pipe that environmentalists hate. But to grid engineers, it is a propane and natural gas liquid superhighway. Unlike coal or oil, which can be stockpiled, the natural gas and propane that power the Midwest's electric grid are delivered just in time. It is a flow-based system. The gas comes out of the ground in Western Canada, travels through Wisconsin and Michigan via Line 5, and goes straight into the turbines that generate electricity for General Motors, Ford, and Cleveland Cliffs Steel. There is no storage buffer. There is no backup plan. Yesterday, under the guidance of Prime Minister Mark Carney, Canada declared a national energy emergency. They argued that with a harsh winter approaching, Canadian resources must be reserved for Canadian homes first. It sounded reasonable. It sounded polite. But in economic terms, it was a guillotine. When Canada throttled the flow by 60% last night, the pressure in American pipelines dropped instantly. Imagine trying to drink a thick milkshake through a collapsed straw. That is what happened to the turbines at gas-fired power plants in Michigan. Sensors detected the pressure drop, safety protocols kicked in, and the massive generators powering the U.S. auto industry tripped offline to prevent catastrophic damage. Grid operators at PJM Interconnection stared at their screens in horror. They didn't lose power because lines were down. They lost it because the fuel simply stopped showing up. In hours, the wholesale price of electricity in Detroit jumped from $40 per megawatt hour to over $4,000. For Ford, electricity is the second highest operating cost after labor. At those prices, every minute of operation is $1 million loss. So, at 2:14 a.m., plant managers pulled the main breaker. The Midwest is not just dark, it is paralyzed. And the terrifying part is that the valve controlling the gas is on the other side of the border, protected by Canadian sovereignty, completely out of reach of the U.S. Marines. To appreciate the devastation in Detroit, you must understand the bitter irony that led us here. This blackout was not caused by a foreign enemy. In a twisted turn of fate, Canada simply gave the state of Michigan exactly what it had been asking for. For the past decade, Line 5 has been the most contentious political issue in the Great Lakes region. Successive Michigan administrations campaigned to shut it down, calling it a ticking time bomb. The narrative in Lansing was simple. This pipeline benefits Canada, but the risk belongs to Michigan. They believed Line 5 was merely a shortcut for Canadian oil to travel from western to eastern Canada, using Michigan as a driveway. That assumption was a catastrophic miscalculation. Line 5 is not just a transit route, it is a distribution line. Along its journey, it bleeds off massive amounts of natural gas liquids, specifically propane, into the Midwest. 55% of the propane used to heat Michigan homes comes from that pipe. When Mark Carney acted, he didn't need to issue a threat. He simply weaponized Michigan's own arguments against the United States. In the diplomatic note sent to Washington, the language was chillingly polite. Canada stated that, out of respect for the safety of the Great Lakes, and to inspect the integrity of the line during high-pressure winter season, they would voluntarily suspend flows. It was malicious compliance at the highest level. While the media focused on tariffs, Canadian regulators quietly deployed a weapon few realized they possessed: the Domestic Strategic Reserve Protocol. Canada is a massive energy exporter, but its laws allow the government to restrict exports if domestic supply is threatened. Yesterday, Ottawa declared that emergency, citing anomalous weather. They mandated that Canadian storage must be filled to 100% capacity before a single drop leaves the country. By framing this as a domestic safety measure, Canada bypassed free trade agreements. The moment the order was signed, Canadian energy companies declared force majeure on contracts with American buyers. Suddenly, the contracts General Motors and Dow Chemical relied on became worthless. The supply chain wasn't just broken, it was legally dissolved. Within 4 hours, the flow rate at the Sarnia distribution hub, the main artery feeding the U.S. Midwest, plummeted. Washington was caught off guard, unprepared for their closest ally to simply say, "Sorry, we need this for ourselves." This reveals the fragility of the American system. Why can't we just send American gas to Detroit? The U.S. is a top energy producer after all. The answer reveals a humiliating secret. The United States has the resources, but it does not have the plumbing. We built a system designed to push energy out to the coasts for export, not to move it around internally. The Midwest infrastructure was designed in the 1960s with one assumption: energy flows south from Canada. You cannot simply flip a switch and reverse the flow of a continent-sized pipeline network overnight. So why not ship it? Here is where a century-old ghost haunts the White House: the Jones Act. This 1920 law mandates that goods moving between American ports must be carried on ships built, owned, and crewed by Americans. The fatal flaw is that there are almost no LNG tankers that meet these requirements. It is cheaper and easier for a Texas company to sell gas to China than to Detroit. Texas is swimming in gas, while Michigan starves. The contagion didn't stop at Ford. The first domino to fall was the steel industry. In Cleveland and Gary, massive blast furnaces rely on natural gas to reach 3,000 degrees. If a furnace loses heat, the molten iron inside solidifies, a catastrophic event known as bricking the furnace. Once this happens, the infrastructure is lost forever. You cannot just turn it back on. It must be dynamited and rebuilt. The pain radiates further. In rural Ohio and Indiana, natural gas is a raw ingredient for ammonia, the base of nitrogen fertilizer. With gas cut, fertilizer plants have declared force majeure. Fertilizer prices have already doubled, meaning the cost of growing food in America just skyrocketed. While the Midwest scrambles, Chinese-owned factories in Mexico are running 3 shifts a day. Companies like BYD, bypassing U.S. tariffs, are sitting on massive inventories. They don't rely on the Canadian grid. By the time Michigan's power returns, global contracts will be rewritten, and customers will have switched brands. The president is left with 3 levers to pull, and all of them are disasters. First, invoke the Defense Production Act. But pipeline construction takes years, not weeks. This is a solution for 2030, not today. Second, sign an executive order waiving the Jones Act. But there is a physical trap. The Great Lakes have no LNG import terminals. Even if ships arrived, they would be floating bombs with nowhere to plug in. Third, negotiate. To get the valve turned back on, Washington will likely have to grant Canada a permanent exemption from all new tariffs. We are looking at three timelines. In the best case, a deal is struck in 48 hours, and gas flows, but the psychological damage is done. In the moderate case, the standoff drags on, rolling blackouts become normal, and the U.S. enters a deep recession. In the nightmare scenario, the furnaces freeze. If Cleveland Cliffs goes cold, the Rust Belt officially rusts over. The Detroit blackout will be remembered as the moment North America lost its innocence regarding energy security. We learned that energy independence is meaningless if you don't control the delivery mechanism. This blackout forces a hard question. What is the price of sovereignty? If you want absolute environmental safety, you accept a smaller economy. If you want energy security, you must build the pipelines you hate. You cannot have both. Investors now know the North American grid is not a fortress. The factories of the future may not be built in Michigan or Ontario, but in places where power is guaranteed regardless of politics. So I turn the question to you. Do we protect the lakes or save the industry? I want to see your vote in the comments below.